Welcome to Network Basics for Hackers from Hackers Arise. I'm OTW, and I think it's the second. This is the second run of this course. Um, this course is designed to basically be the Linux basics for hackers for networking. Right, so you all are familiar with my book, Linux Basics for Hackers. Came out in 2018 and immediately became a bestseller. It's still the best-selling Linux book out there. Um, it's one of the best hacker books out there. This new book coming out, Network Basics for Hackers, is meant to be the same, but for networking. So it's how networks work and how hackers can take advantage of that information, that knowledge to take control of a system, to gather reconnaissance, to take control. So that's what we're going to focus on. But before we begin to do that, we need to develop some critical understanding, some fundamental understanding of how networks work. Once we have that fundamental understanding of how networks work, then we're going to go ahead and show you how that information can be used by an attacker hacker. So in this course, I'm hoping that you have a installation of Kali. Let me show you what I have. Okay, I've got, yeah, here we go. I've got 2023 running right here in VirtualBox. Okay, you can have any of them. If you got 2022, 2021, 2019, that's fine. Okay. Um, I haven't really been too keen on what they've been doing with the Kalis in recent years, and so I'm sticking with 2020, but it doesn't really make any difference what version you're running. It's all going to work the same. Okay, it's Debian Linux. Okay, with a bunch of tools. Right. Um, but I've got versions of Kali going back for over 10 years. Okay, back to, gosh, probably back to 2005 when it was called Backtrack. And I think probably 2019 was my favorite, but this is 2020. If you got any of them, you should be fine. All right, let's go back to our presentation. All right, as I was saying, this course is designed to provide the aspiring cyber warrior the basics of networking, network protocols, and how hackers can use them and attack them. I'll be using Kali Linux 2020, Wireshark, and TCP dump. Don't worry about Wireshark and TCP dump because it's built into your Kali. All right. And if not, you can easily just download it by going sudo apt install Wireshark or TCP dump or what have you. Okay. So also a little bit of housekeeping. Here we are, we're starting approximately at 3 p.m. UTC. We'll run for about an hour, hour and a half, take a 15-minute break for bathroom, coffee, what have you, and then come back and do another hour, hour and a half. I'm trying to keep the courses under 4 hours a day. I found that people, they lose their attention span gets stretched beyond that. So we're trying to keep this under 4 hours. That means that we will be done at the latest at 7 p.m. UTC. So 3.5, 4 hour class. All right. So this is what we're starting with. We're going to look at our outline is going to involve introduction, some infrastructure, networking protocols, TCP/IP, IP addresses, routing, DHCP, DNS, SNMTP, ARP, SMB. These are all TCP/IP protocols. And then we're going to switch a little bit, okay, into some radio, okay, networking. Bluetooth is radio networking, RF networking. Wi-Fi is radio networking. And lastly, SMTP, if we have time, okay? So we're going to try to cover all of those. The book is going to cover even more subject matter than we have here. I think the book has got a few other subjects that we won't have time. This is going to cover all the key, probably the most important protocols and networking. So let's start off. What is a network? It's where two or more computers are exchanging information over wire or radio connection. Okay, we can't ignore radio connection. Some of you have probably recognized that radio networking, radio systems are kind of my passion at the moment. That's why we have the software-defined radio hacking course. We'll be running it, I think, in August again. And right now, I have a tutorial on Hackers Arise on how to use software-defined radio to jam the radio signals of the Russians. All right, so I mean, a lot of people have asked me, like, what good is all this information about radio hacking? Well, there are so many radio signals out there. Okay, so many things are using radio signals, and if you can hack into them, okay, jam them, listen in on them, that is a huge advantage to you. All right, and to whoever you're working for. Emily says, yes, IMSI catcher, right? That's one of the tutorials I have on there. One of the things that we're working on is to put together a system, and we pretty much already have this done. We just haven't published it yet. Is to put together a system where you can listen in to basically anybody's cell phone conversation. Right? Remember, cell phone is a radio signal, right? It's basically a radio signal between your handset and the cell tower. And one of the things that law enforcement and the military have used for a long time is to be able to intercept that communication and listen in on it. Okay, it goes by the commercial name called Stingray. Okay, and they're made by a number of companies. And law enforcement uses them to basically set them up in an area of where they believe the perpetrator is at, and basically it intercepts the signal from all of the cell phones in the area. So it acts as a local cell phone tower. So everybody your cell phone will connect to the closest tower. So if somebody puts a van in your neighborhood with a Stingray in it, your cell phone will automatically connect to it. All right. And then whoever has control of the Stingray can listen in and watch all of your communication. The first step of that is to put in an IMSI catcher. Okay, that catches the IMSI number, and then be able to identify the user and then listen to their conversation. It's a relatively complex process, but we've got it down to about $2,000 in equipment versus the commercial version costs about $50,000. Sartorius asks, does VoIP circumnavigate that? Yes, VoIP doesn't use the cell tower, right? So it does circumnavigate, but then VoIP is vulnerable to all of the attacks against the internet, right? So, the idea is that people would use a cell because VoIP, can be easily intercepted. Emily says, had my cell overcome by one. Emily, somebody's listening in on you. Okay. Overcome by one? They were listening to you, or they simply, they were listening to you. So Emily's a target. Emily, as you others don't know, works for the U.S. military in Belgium. Okay. So somebody wants to know what Emily's doing over there. Somebody's coming in, or somebody's switching over.
I'm here. I don't know if you can hear me.
Well, we sure can hear you.
I'm sorry. I've been having some difficulties trying to connect because I use Linux and GoToMeeting.
Okay.
Only works in Chrome. You know how it is.
Yeah. Okay. So now turn your mic off, whoever you are.
Okay. Jamil.
Jamil, you want to
Yes,
give?
sir. Jamil Dominic.
Okay.
Let
All
me
right.
turn it off.
Now turn your mic off. We all know you're here. All right. So yeah, this is one of the things that we're working on. We'll publish that probably in the next year or so, but just know that that's possible. It's possible to intercept cell signals, okay, from anybody. Hey, Tyler's here. We're still getting people coming in. I said it was 45 people on the list. Um, we're still getting more coming in. But the idea is that once again, is to create a system for under about $2,000 that you can listen to anybody's cell phone conversation. We've got the software-defined radio for hackers course coming up in August. So put that on your calendar. It's a good introduction to software-defined radio. All right. So what's a network? Anything that communicates between over wire or radio. Okay. And Bluetooth is a good example, Wi-Fi a good example of radio signals that we use basically every day. But quite frankly, there are so many protocols that use radio now. And that's why my emphasis on software-defined radio is that this very few people are really addressing this. Um, I know that the military is addressing it, the espionage agencies are addressing it, but very few other um, training programs or books are addressing radio hacking. So that's part of my emphasis. All right, a few key terms. Local area network, LAN. WAN is wide area network. And PAN is personal area network. Right, personal area network often refers to the Bluetooth network that surrounds you, very localized, personal. Why network? Okay, well, this is actually, you might think, oh, why network? This was actually a big question in the early days of computing and of PCs for that matter. Matter of fact, in the early days of the PCs could not network. All right. So you would buy yourself a PC, an IBM compatible, whatever, the Apple II, whatever, Commodore 64, what have you. These systems were not meant for networking. So this was a key issue. And networking of PCs really only became widespread in the mid 1990s, just 25 years ago or so, 27 years ago. Matter of fact, Microsoft really didn't have any networking built into Windows until the mid 90s. All right. So why do we want to network? We want to share files. We want to share resources. We want to share programs. We want to share the internet. Okay. Servers and clients. Most networks are configured with servers and clients. The server usually has storage, files, printers, and other resources. The clients are usually less powerful computers with less resources. This terminology is reversed when we're starting talking about SCADA systems. SCADA are the industrial control systems, and the terminology that we usually think of in servers and clients is reversed in that environment. Key elements. Oftentimes people will simply call this a NIC, okay? Network Interface Card, or NIC. Here it is right here, all right? Networking cable, okay, here's some network cable. This is a network switch, a network router, wireless networks, and network software, okay? Different size of networks include LAN, WAN, MAN, metropolitan area, okay, meaning covering a wide area. We got somebody else coming in. This class is getting big now. Metropolitan area. Ah, John's here. Okay. Let's see. What countries do we have covered here? We got a bunch from the US. Sweden, UK, we got a good spread around Europe and the U.S. Nobody from Asia looks like. I can't recognize anybody from Hawaii. Angus is in Hawaii, so Angus is kind of in Asia. In any case, he's the one who has to get up earliest for class. So metropolitan area network, and then a personal area network. Network topology. All right. So topology is the word topology means basically the structure of the network. And in the early days of computing, we had these bus networks like this right here. This type of network still exists in SCADA industrial control systems. So you might say, nobody uses this anymore. Well, almost every industrial plant out there, okay, refineries, manufacturing facilities are using this. Basically, the data moves back and forth over this wire, okay, and whoever it's intended for picks it up. All right. Oh, John, are you in Africa? Uh, John says, you don't talk about Africa. Why? Are you in Africa? I thought you were in the UK. I'm sorry. John, are you in Africa? What country are you in? I thought you were in the London area. My bad. So we do have somebody in Africa. So this is the original topology of networks. Was basically one system sent. You're Ghana. Oh, you're Ghanaian based in the UK. Okay, there you go. I thought you were in the UK. The data flows back and forth over this wire. There are terminators on both ends, okay, so that the data bounces back and forth. It's really not a very efficient way to communicate. But in the early days, when there wasn't that much data going over the wire, it worked just fine. Okay. Um, then you end up with the star topology, which is more common today, right? Like this here, where there's a central switch or router, and everybody connects to it. And this is, you can see kind of a star. Oh, and YAML's in Puerto Rico, so not really the United States. It depends upon your perspective. But yeah, YAML's in Puerto Rico, territory of the United States. Um, so we're spread around quite a distance here. Star topology. Now I don't have a image up here of the ring topology. A ring topology, as you can imagine, is simply a circle, okay, of machines that are communicating in a circle, in a ring, and the data just goes around the circle. And when the target sees the data that's intended for them, they pull it off the ring. Okay, this is an old technology that IBM used to use. You don't see this very often. Okay, and then we have kind of a combination of all of those in what's called the mesh technology. Now, meshes, I think, is something that you should pay attention to. Um, I have a tutorial on Hackers Arise about an app that will work when the towers are down. So when the cell towers are down and the internet's down, if everybody has an app, you can create a mesh where everybody can communicate to each other without the cell towers, without the internet. Okay, there is no central servers. All right, and in this case, the app I'm talking about is called Briar, and I put it out there for the Ukrainians to be able to communicate with each other if Russia takes out the cell towers, if Russia takes out the internet, okay, which they have in some communities, then you can create what's called a personal mesh where every phone essentially becomes a router. All right. Now, another application for this is you may be aware that um, Elon Musk, his SpaceX company, has a new internet service, okay, called Starlink, and they use a mesh technology among their satellites. All right. So the satellite, so when you communicate up to a satellite, and then the satellite, say this is your satellite right here. Then your satellite communicates to another satellite, and then essentially goes down to the ground, to the ground station, and then connects to the internet that way. All right. Somebody just came in. So all of these, oh, okay, Angus has got to relog in. That's fine. So all of these are in use. Pretty much the only one that you don't see anymore is Ring. The mesh, although it hasn't been used much in the past, you're going to see it more and more in the future. All right. And Elon Musk's Starlink is a good example, or the Briar app on your phone also use mesh technology, mesh topology. Some of the keys in the infrastructure include cables. All right, you've probably all seen Ethernet cable, patch panels, network switches, and a router. A patch. We're going to show pictures of each of these in a moment. So if you're not familiar with them, one of the things that most people who are new to networks hate is the OSI model. But I'm going to emphasize to you that you should know it. All right. It might seem overly simplistic or theoretical, but people in our industry all talk in terms of the OSI model. Okay, people always are talking about, well, this is a layer 3 technology, or this is a layer 2 technology, or a layer 5 technology. So you've got to know what these layers are. So let's start off with the very top. There's 7 layers to the OSI model. You should know all of these. Now, I'm going to give you a mnemonic that will help you to be able to memorize them. So there's 7 layers, so we can take the first letter of each of them and create a mnemonic to help you remember. So all people seem to need data processing. Okay, if you can remember that. Okay, you got APSTNDP. Okay, other people go the other direction, go up, and they go, please do not throw away sausage, pizza. I don't know. I forget what that one is. Let's try it again. Please do not throw sausage, pizza away. That's what it is. All right. Please do not throw sausage, pizza away. I like the one going down, but to each their own. All people seem to need data processing. All right. At the very top, we've got the application layer. All right. These are the things that we're working on our computers, such as email or browser. Okay. These protocols include HTTP, FTP, IRC, SSH, DNS. They're all operating at the application layer. The presentation layer, okay, basically this is what's preparing the data. Carlos has it a little different. All people seem to need delicious pizza. All right, that one sounds good too. All right, whatever works for you, Carlos. Okay. So presentation layer is what prepares the data to be for the application layer. And much of what goes on here are the cryptography of the encryption of the data, such as an SSL, SSH, IMAP, FTP, MPEG, JPEG. Okay, these are all presentation layer applications. Okay, session is meant to sync and send to a port. These include APIs, sockets, WinSock. Transport layer, it's end-to-end connection. So this is controlling the connections between two systems. such as TCP and UDP. Okay, we'll talk more about TCP and UDP in a bit. Okay, network. Okay, this is so oftentimes probably the thing you'll hear most often in our industry is layer 3 technology. Layer 3 technology. Well, that means that it's using IP. Okay, IP is a separate protocol that controls where the data goes to by the IP address, right? By IP address. These include IP, ICMP, IPsec, IGMP, all right? And then layer 2, okay? So this is layer 7, this is layer 1, all right? Just so we're clear here. Layer 2 then is data link layer, and this is the technologies that use essentially MAC addresses. MAC addresses are physical, global, unique addresses, all right? So things like switches and bridges, okay, will use the MAC address to determine where the traffic should be going to. So people will also say, well, that's a layer 2 switch. Okay, well, okay, that means it's using MAC addresses. And then physical is basically at the very base, okay, the physical layer, including things like all the physical connections, including the network interface card, coax, fiber, wireless hubs, repeaters. They're all physical infrastructure. All right. So try to memorize that. Okay. Cable infrastructure. Okay. This is some twisted pair cable. People often refer to shielded twisted pair or unshielded twisted pair. So this would be often shortened to UTP, okay, unshielded twisted pair or shielded twisted pair. The difference being that it has this shield, okay, that blocks EMI, okay. EMI is electromagnetic interference. So everything that has electricity running through it, okay, is giving off EMI. Everything that has electricity running through it gives off EMI. That basically is the electromagnetic field is emanating out from it. No matter what motor you have, what wire you have, it's always sending out an electromagnetic signal. Now, those electromagnetic signals can interfere with each other if they're too close to each other or too strong. If you have shielded twisted pair, it can help to keep that from those from interfering. So, for instance, if you had a network inside of an industrial facility where there's lots of big magnets, okay, every motor has a magnet, every generator has a magnet. Magnets give off really powerful, okay, EMI. So you would want to protect your system by using shielded twisted pair. In most cases, in people's homes, in their offices, they're going to use unshielded twisted pair. Okay. Okay, Yaml says caused by the voltage running in the outside and it transfers through inductance. Yes. Okay, so all of these, almost every electric device, we can say every electric device, okay, is giving off EMI, and that can interfere and cause corruption of data. It can also, if you're talking about national security, it's possible, and all the spy agencies use it. Okay, spy agencies they try to read this EMI to be able to determine what data is going to that cable. So remember, this is going to be it's a relatively weak signal, but at a distance, I can actually see. Okay, I can read the EMI off a cable, an unshielded cable. All right, and then I can see the data going through it. Now, in highly confidential environments, okay, like the military or like the spy agencies use, they actually have walls that will not allow any type of EMI to enter or leave. Okay, so They're very aware that their EMI can be read by other nations' actors. Here's the RJ45 connector. Okay. These are the ones that you might right now have connected into the back of your network interface card. This is a patch panel. Okay. Patch panel is where all of the systems, okay, are able to connect into the network. These are often referred to as patch cables, okay? Patch cables into a patch panel. Repeaters and hubs. Repeaters and hubs are dumb devices. They're not smart. They were common in the early days of the internet. Basically, all they're doing is taking data and sending it out to all the other connections that are connected to this particular hub. They don't make any decisions. That's when we say it's dumb. Okay, it doesn't make any decisions. Nowadays, almost everybody uses smart devices that, for instance, switches that actually make a decision where they look at the data and they send it to the proper connection. This is a switch. So a switch goes ahead and looks at the data coming in and says, oh, this packet is intended for this MAC address, and so I'm going to send it to this particular system, and not to everybody, so it's a critical one for confidentiality, and it's also critical for being able to reduce the amount of traffic on your network. So with a repeater or a hub, okay, these guys go ahead and send all the data to everybody, and that creates a lot of traffic on your network, but it also increases the risk that somebody's going to be able to see somebody else's data. MAC addresses. We talked about this a little bit. Let's talk a little more about it. Okay. MAC stands for Media Access Control. Every network interface has a globally unique address. So remember that IP addresses are not globally unique, right? There are only 4.3 billion IP addresses, okay? IPv4. We'll talk more about the difference between IPv6 and IPv4, okay? But we're all primarily using IPv4 right now, which has been around for a long time. It's been around since the early days of the internet. There's only 4.3 IP addresses, 4.3 billion IP addresses, and there's 7.5 billion people on the planet, right? And most of us are using multiple IP addresses, right? So you might at any given time be using 3, 4, 5, 6 IP addresses. You can see that there's not enough IP addresses. And so as a result, that's why we have this distinction between private IP addresses and public IP addresses. This is to take care of the shortage of IP addresses. IPv6, when it's fully implemented, will take care of this. In the meantime, we have these globally unique physical addresses. These are physical. Every device has a unique globally unique ID. All right, this is the MAC address. Provides a means for network devices to track each other. It's sometimes referred to as a physical address, and it is layer 2. There it is. Let's go to our Kali system. All right, let's talk a little bit about our MAC address. Okay, hopefully you have Kali there. If you don't, you can just watch me. But so one of the first commands you'll learn in networking in any system, okay, whether it be Windows or Mac or Linux, is how do I find out my IP address? And in Linux and in Mac, okay, it's ifconfig, right? and it comes back and says command not found. And that can be really confusing to somebody who's new, because what you need to do is use sudo, okay, ifconfig, or switch to the root user. So these new Kalis, they require you to use sudo or switch into the root user. I'll be using sudo throughout class, okay. So go sudo ifconfig, it asks me for my password, and it shows me all of my interfaces. All right, it shows me the interfaces, and it also shows me, all right, the MAC addresses. Now let's go through each of the things. Let's skip this one right here because this one isn't connected to anything. Here, yours is probably ETH0. Okay, it's Ethernet 0, Ethernet 1, and this is loopback. Okay, so loopback, we'll address that one first. Here it is, it's 127.0.0.1. Okay, that's a reserved address for your own machine. Some people refer to it as home, okay, or loopback. So that when so for instance, if you're running a web server on Kali, okay, that's going to be your IP address, right? Also note up here, and this one here, all right, ETH1, all right, we have, here's our MAC address. As we're talking about MAC addresses, this is a globally unique address of the interface, all right? Here is my IP address, all right? Here is my net mask. Here's my broadcast. Now we'll talk about broadcast and net mask in just a little bit, all right? Most important thing I wanted you to see is that this is a globally unique MAC address. So on a local area network, this is really the way that routing is done on the local area network. It's done by MAC addresses. And we'll talk a little bit about ARP later on, where in the ARP protocol, we basically map IP addresses to the physical address. That's what ARP does. And this is what it's mapping it to. It's mapping, so an ARP, we'll talk more about ARP, so if you don't catch this right away, ARP says that this MAC address is using this IP address. That's what ARP does. All right, back to our presentation. Yeah, Sartorius says IPA works as well. Give me one moment. I've got somebody who just is trying to get in, and so for some reason he's not getting the credentials. Give me 1 second to help him out, and we'll be right back to class. Okay, got him taken care of. All right. And here's our MAC addresses showing you. Same thing I just showed you in Kali. All right. It's basically the globally unique. This is the only machine in the world that has that address. All right. It's 48 bits in length, and there's 280 trillion addresses. So that should be enough for a while. Okay. Remember, there's 7.5 billion people. Only about half the people on the planet are on the internet. So it gives you some idea that you're part of that class, okay, of half the people on the planet who actually have internet access. I don't know if you see that as a good thing or a bad thing, You would have thought by now that there'd be more than half the people on the planet, but most people can't afford, one, even a phone, or two, have internet access to their locality. Okay, so it's about, I think last figure I saw was about 48% of the planet has access to the internet. Okay, let's talk about packets. Okay, packets are analogous to an envelope carrying a message from a source to a destination NIC. Okay, contains header information as well as data in the payload. So in the header of the packet, that's the key information that's going to get it to where it's going. The payload is going to be the information, the data. All right. So we have packets that include both of those things. All right. And typically, you're going to have in most of your communication, you're going to have a combination of TCP and IP in your packet. All right. So this is what these are just the headers. All right. And in the IP header up here, you can see that probably the most important things are source address right here and destination address. All right. You can see a few other things that you might be familiar with. The time to live. This is how many hops will it make before it stops hopping, going from router to router to router, trying to find its destination. This field right here is the protocol that says I'm combining IP with protocol 6, which just happens to be TCP. Okay. Over here we have flags and fragment offset. Flags, in this case, IP flags are different than TCP flags. This flag basically determines whether or not the packet is fragmented or not. So it's either DF, don't fragment, or MF, more fragments. Adi just made it. Hey! So this is the way, one of the beauties of TCP/IP is that its robustness, that it can handle a lot of problems, like, for instance, lost packets, what have you. It can also handle fragmentation of packets. And this is where it would signal that the packet is fragmented. And here is, if it's fragmented, where do we put them together again? How do we put them together? We got a fragment. Where did they break at? That's what the fragment offset is. So this is a feature that is used for robustness of TCP/IP. The hackers can use it for a number of reasons, number of ways. One is if I've got malware and I want to send it past your IDS, I can fragment it. So you're looking for, a particular signature of malware, and I can take the malware and break it up into pieces and then send it past your IDS, and it doesn't recognize it because it's broken up into pieces. All right. And of course, those pieces will then get reassembled at the destination, and the malware then works. Now, most IDSs in 2022 try to capture this, and it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of CPU cycles, because imagine that you get this IDS working out there, and it's seeing these packets, and it has to go ahead and take the fragments and collect them all and hold them in memory someplace, and then reassemble them and then scan them. All right. So it's not 100% perfect, but most of the time, fragmentation of malware, whereas it was very common and very effective 10 years ago, doesn't work necessarily anymore. Okay. On the TCP side, the most important thing are ports. Source port, destination port. Okay. Sequence number, acknowledgement number. All right, let's be clear here. Port is, if you're not familiar, port is kind of like, think of the IP address as like a building address. So it's the address of the building that the traffic is going to, say a big apartment building, okay, or a big office building, right? So that would be the IP address. And then within that building, apartment building, office building, there are individual offices, and that would be the port. All right. So IP address gets us to the proper machine. Port gets us to the proper office, okay, location within that machine. So for instance, HTTP uses port 80, right? HTTPS uses port 443. DNS uses port 53. SMB uses port 445. SNMP uses port 161, on and on and on. Okay, you should know the top 50 or so ports. Okay, that's one of the things that you should study and know before you proceed. People are going to talk about, traffic by port number, and you have to immediately know what that is. And there are 65,536 ports, all right, but only about 100 are commonly used. So those 100 are the ones that you should know. The other ones, of course, nobody's going to memorize 65,536. Now, you might wonder where these numbers are coming from. 65,536 is 2 to the 16th power. Okay, so remember, everything is zeros and ones, right? This is all a base 2 system. Okay, so ports are 2 to the 16th. All right. IP addresses are 2 to the 32nd power. Okay, that's where 4.3 billion comes from. Okay, 4.3, 2 to the 32nd power is 4.3 billion. 2 to the 16th power is 65,536. 2 to the 8th power is 255 or 256. Okay, so all these numbers that I'll be rattling off are all base 2 numbers, okay, that if you're around computing and hacking a lot, you will get familiar with if you're not familiar with already. Okay, so these ports are like a apartment address in a building, all right, and you should know the top 50 or 100 of them. Sequence number, acknowledgement number, these are the ways that TCP, once again, one of those robustness features of TCP IP is that it makes sure that every packet arrives. Okay, if it doesn't arrive, it then will send the packet again. How does it know the packet arrives? By sequence numbers, acknowledgement numbers. Okay, sequence numbers is a number that the sender puts on the packet. Okay, and if it arrives, okay, to the destination, the next packet is going to have an acknowledgement number of that sequence number. It's basically going to echo it back so that the sender knows that the packet actually did arrive. If that acknowledgement number isn't received within a specified period of time, then it goes and sends the packet again. That's how the system works to make sure that every packet arrives. Now, if you're a little bit familiar with UDP, okay, the user datagram protocol, which we'll talk about a little bit, it doesn't have this feature, okay? It doesn't know if a packet arrived. So some of these things that we have built in and we take for granted in TCP IP are not necessarily built into other protocols. This was designed to make sure that every packet made its way to the destination. Now down here, you should also know these 6 flags right here, all right? We have the urge, ACK, push, reset, SYN, and FIN flags. These are the way that TCP signals to the other system what its intentions are. So when we open up a connection, an HTTP connection, all right, or any connection, TCP connection, to another system, we want to send it a packet with a SYN flag that says, I want to talk to you. That's what SYN means. I want to talk to you. If the other system wants to talk back, okay, they want to communicate with you, they'll send back a packet with the SYN and the ACK flag set. If they don't want to talk to you or they're not available, they will send you a reset packet. All right. Let's take a look at this in our Kali. All right. This is all kind of theoretical. Let's make it real. Okay. Let's go sudo and let's go Wireshark. Okay. And this should open up Wireshark. Wireshark is a network sniffer. Okay. Basically, they call it here a network analyzer. Some people call it a protocol analyzer. Some people call it a sniffer. It's all of those things. All right. It's all of those things. And so when we open it up, I'll give you a second to open it up. The first thing it asks us is, where do you want to sniff on? What interface do you want to listen on? And so what I want to listen on is right here on ETH1. I could listen on ETH0, but there's nothing traveling on ETH0. And I could choose any, so it goes ahead and listens on all of my interfaces. Notice I have some other possibilities here. If I was using Wi-Fi, I would probably want to select WLAN 0 or WLAN 1, which would be my Wi-Fi adapter. Now, I also want to point out, if you're using a virtual machine like I am here, that even though I'm connected to you via a Wi-Fi, that when the virtual machine converts that Wi-Fi connection to a wired connection. So literally I am on Wi-Fi here, but when it comes into my virtual machine, it converts it into a wired connection, ETH1. All right. So I go ahead and click on it. And now I should be able to see all the traffic. Now, I'm not seeing anything because I'm not doing anything. So what I want to do is to go and create some traffic. I'm going to open up another terminal, and I'll just say I'm going to ping Google. And you can immediately begin to see the traffic. All right. In Linux, when you say ping, unlike in Windows, it just keeps on running. So it'll just run until you stop it. So you can see the protocol is ICMP. That's one of the key TCP/IP protocols. We know ICMP primarily as ping, all right? But it has many other uses besides, okay? But ping is probably our most common use of the ICMP protocol. Notice that in Wireshark, it gives us the number of the packet right here. It gives us the time, and this is the elapsed time, okay? You can see it's right down to whatever that is, like millionths of a second. The source IP address, okay, that's my IP address, okay? Now this is my private IP address, so we'll talk more about private versus public IP addresses, but this is not a IP address that is going to be recognizable to anybody on the outside world, because this is only available inside my network, okay? It's a private IP. We'll talk more about this if you're not familiar with it. And then this is a public IP for Google. Yours may be different because Google has multiple servers around the world, all right? And then here's the protocol. Here's an ARP coming, all right? You see this ARP? Okay, this is where it's assigning the IP address to a MAC address, to the globally unique address. If we can go ahead and grab any packet, just click on it, all right? And we can get details. We double click on it, we get this window here. If we click on it, we can go down here, and you can see as we expand, it says Internet Protocol version 4, so it's IPv4. Source IP, this is the response from Google. It's going back to me, all right? Tells me it's version 4, the header length. All right. Remember we talked about flags. Okay. You can see that it's set at 0, which means it's don't fragment. Okay. And the offset set to 0. The time to live is 120 hops. After 120 hops, it'll stop hopping, meaning as it goes across the internet, right, it is looking for its destination. If it doesn't find its destination within 120 hops, it'll stop looking. Okay. So this is ICMP protocol. What we're probably more familiar with is TCP. So let's go open up a browser. All right. And let's go. You can see I just went up to the Kali and then open browser. And now I'm going to generate some HTTP traffic. Let's go to Hackers Arise. And when I do this, I can see that the traffic is going to start to change. Okay, you can see the TLS, you can see DNS. Okay, you got lots of TCP traffic. See in the protocol here. Let's go ahead and click on one of these. And here we were talking about the TCP IP headers, right? So in Wireshark, we can break down the headers, right, here by looking at the Internet Protocol. This is the header information, only the header information. That's all it is. It's not the data inside the packet. And then here's the TCP header. Let's look at that. Okay, so we have TCP, Transmission Control Protocol. The port it's coming from is port 80. Destination port is 33,332. There's the sequence and acknowledgement numbers we had talked about. All right. Source port, destination port. All right. Sequence numbers. So here's the sequence number. This is a relative sequence number. And here's the raw. This is the actual real sequence number on there. Acknowledgement number. Okay, the raw acknowledgement number. Here's the flag. Okay. This is the other system responding to us, right? That's the acknowledgement flag. Window size is another one of those features that TCP/IP has built into it that allows for the robustness of TCP/IP. In other words, what it does is that it manages flow control. It manages if I'm sending data too fast, the other system can communicate and say, hey, you're sending data too fast. Just hold on a little bit. And then I can hold that data in the window size. But you can see if we go through here, we're seeing lots of different protocols being transmitted. I'm not doing anything on the internet, right? I'm not doing anything. And this is all the data that is traveling, okay, across my system. I do have the ICMP. I still have the ping running. You can see all the ICMP. If I want to filter out all of that traffic and I just want to see TCP, I can just type into this window right here, right, TCP. And now that's all I'm going to see. I'm not going to see any ICMP. I'm not going to see any of the other stuff. Notice that you can see on these TCP, you can see the fin and the ACK. Fin is the flag that is set to close a connection, finish, okay? Here we see ACK, fin, ACK means acknowledge. It's a way that when two systems are communicating to each other, all the packets have an acknowledgement, the A flag set on it. That says, okay, we're talking to each other. This is good. This is alive. We know that when the two systems want to communicate with each other, that the first thing they have to do is to create the three-way handshake, right? Three-way handshake in TCP, that is a SYN, a SYN-ACK, and then an ACK after that. So let's see if we can't capture that sequence here. Let's see if we can You can see a lot of closes. Let's see if we can find the, we're going to look for the, let's go and look for the TCP flags and look for the SYN. Okay, so this says I want just TCP protocol and I want the flags. I'm looking just for the SYN. All right, just those packets that have SYN. All right, and now you can see all the packets that have SYNs. Okay, so you can see here's the initialization of a connection. It's port 51916. That's coming from my system to another system on the out. This looks like some on the outside or somewhere in my network going to port 443, SYN, SYNAC, and then there should be an ACK as well. But we're not looking for that. So this is the three-way handshake here. SYN, SYNAC, and then there'll be an ACK. Every TCP-based connection starts off with that three-way handshake. SYN, SYNAC, ACK, and then the data can flow. Then the packets can flow between the two. In TCP, that's only in TCP though. That doesn't apply necessarily to other protocols. Now, TCP is often used in conjunction with other protocols that want the features of TCP. So anything that uses TCP has to go through this three-way handshake, and the three-way handshake is done by these flags that you should be familiar with. All right. The most important flags to be familiar with are SYN, ACK, FIN, and reset. Okay. SYN is opening a connection. FIN is closing a connection. ACK says, I want to continue to talk to you. And reset says, I don't want to talk to you. It's reset actually plays a really key role in communication, because if I try to connect to the wrong port, okay, if I try to connect to the wrong port, then I'll get back a reset, which says, you're in the wrong place, buddy. With that having been said, I've got 18 minutes after the hour. Let's take a 15-minute break, and we'll come back and do some more. I've got a few people still trying to get into class, so I'll see you in about 15. Take a bathroom, coffee break, and be back at 33 minutes after the hour. Okay, we're back. And when we left off, we were looking at some of the details of TCP/IP from Wireshark. Wireshark is going to be one of those critical tools that we're going to need to be able to dissect the details of TCP/IP. Let's go back to our presentation now. You've got a little glimpse into the inside of these packets, all right? And let's go back and talk some more. One of the things we really haven't discussed yet, the whole IP structure, the IP address structure, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But this is the header of TCP/IP, and I think it's really important that you understand the header. I mean, you need to understand how these systems work to break them. Right? You can't break a networking protocol unless you understand how it works. Right? So I mentioned that we can, one of the things that we can do is to fragment packets, and this would appear here in the IP header. To be able to do a man-in-the-middle attack, the sequence number and acknowledgement numbers become key. All right. And these become key for any type of reconnaissance on a system. So that's how all that plays out for the hacker. All right. Here's Nmap. It's an excellent tool for opening ports and services. All right. So Nmap is one of those tools that basically takes advantage of these protocols to be able to understand whether or not a system is actually running and what ports are open on it. Let's go over to our Kali system and let's take a look at that. I'm going to close my Wireshark. All right. I can choose to stop and save or stop and quit without saving. Stop and save means I'm going to take all these packets that have passed my wire and put them into a file for later analysis. In this case, I don't want to do that. But if, say, for instance, I had an ongoing attack, I'd want to go ahead and stop and save so that I could go ahead and analyze them later. All right, stop it. And we're going to have to open up to really demonstrate the power of Nmap. Let's go over and open up another system. Let's see what I have over here. I got this OWASP BWA system. I got an email server. I got a Win7. Let's go ahead and open up the Win7 system. And we're going to use the Win7 system as our target. I have a better idea. I'm not going to open the Win7 system. I'm going to use another Kali. Let's do that. Okay. It should be easier for other people to replicate what I'm doing then. I'm going to go open up another Kali. I got a Kali 20. Here's another 2020. I think I have a 2021 here somewhere. Here's 2021. Let's go ahead and use it. We'll use this as our target system. All right, let's log in. And we're going to use Nmap to scan this system. Okay, so if you're not familiar with Nmap, let's clear my screen. All right. Nmap is a simple tool. It's been around for over 20 years. It's a tool that basically sends out packets, TCP/IP packets, to your target. And depending upon what response it gets, it determines whether or not the port on those system is open. First of all, it determines whether or not the system is actually there. Okay, it's up and running, and then determines what ports are open. So how does it determine what ports are open? It sends out packets with the flag SYN that we just looked at, and if it gets a reset back, that means the port is closed. If it gets a SYN ACK back, that means that it's open. It's very simple, right? So it's just using an understanding of TCP/IP to determine what the other system is running. So let's go and do nmap, sudo nmap, and then do -h. And here's our help screen. And there's a lot of information there. But really, we can really boil it down to this is the way Nmap runs. Okay, if you want to go ahead and see whether or not the other system is up and what ports are open, it comes down to simply sudo nmap, okay, and then the type of scan -s, and we'll say we want a TCP scan, okay. That means getting a three-way handshake to determine whether the port's open. And then the IP address, okay, of the other machine. All right, so let's go back and let's find out what the IP address is on this machine. Before we go ahead and scan it, let's first of all check our IP address. Okay, that's not going to work. Sudo ifconfig Okay, our IP address is right here. Okay, 101. All right, let's go check the other system, this one here, and check to see what its IP address is so that we can target it. Sudo ifconfig. Okay, so here's the IP address of this system. Okay, they're on the same network. Notice 192.168.105. All right, and let's go ahead and scan it to see whether one, it's up and available, and then what ports are open. Sudo, all right, nmap -st 192.168.100, and already I forgot the IP address. 5, okay, 5. All right, let's go ahead and run it and see what nmap tells us. Okay, it comes back very quickly. Comes back and says all 1,000 scan ports are closed. How does it know that? It sent a packet with the SYN flag set, and it got a packet with the reset flag on it. That's how it knows. All right. So it tells us that the host is up. The first thing it does is sends a ping to the IP address to make sure it's up, and then it scans 1,000 ports. Okay. Now we know there's 65,536 ports, right? It only scans 1,000 of them by default. Now let's go over to that system and let's open up a port. All right. So let's go sudo, just back to my 2021 system, and we're going to go system control, okay, or service will work as well. Start Apache 2. This is be a web server, okay? It comes back with nothing, which tells us that Apache 2 is running, all right? Now let's go ahead and scan it, all right? And let's see what happens. Notice it comes back and says port 80 is open, all right? That's the way Nmap works. It basically sends out a packet with a SYN and then waits for the response. Okay, it goes through each one of those 1,000 ports. Okay, you see it goes through 1,000 ports very, very quickly. And if it gets a SYN ACK, it's taking advantage of the three-way handshake, we know the port's open. If it gets a reset, it says the port is closed. Pretty simple, right? Just using the knowledge of TCP to be able to scan that system. Now, if you've used Nmap at all, you know that you can also, just ask it to just scan a single port, okay? So we just want to go -P80. So I'm going to just scan for, see whether or not port 80 is open. Yeah, it says, yep, it is open, okay? And I can tell it to scan for a range of ports, say 445. And still, it only finds a single port, but it's pretty cool, right? It tells us, what ports are open. So from the information about the port, we can gather information about what services are running on that system. So before we attack the system, we want to know what services, because when you're attacking a system, very seldom are you attacking the operating system. Very seldom. That's pretty rare. Eternal Blue, for instance, attacks SMB. We would want to know whether or not SMB is open on this system, right? If we're attacking the web server, we want to know if the web server is open. If we're attacking a database, we want to know whether or not the database is running on that machine. So for instance, if we were to go, we want to check 3306. 3306 is MySQL, right? And we can go ahead and check to see if the database is running on that system, and it tells us, nope, it's closed. It's not open, okay? That's how we can determine what services. And then if we know that, for instance, MySQL is open, then we can develop an attack strategy to exploit that particular application. But the first step in any exploitation is to run some scans, reconnaissance against the system. Here, Nmap is the first tool that you probably want to use in doing that kind of reconnaissance. So what we're trying to figure out is what services are running on that system. In this case, the only service that we know is running is HTTP. All right. If we were to scan for, say, port 443, which is HTTPS, it'll come back and say, nope, it's not. It's not running. Or if we wanted to see whether or not port 445, which is SMB, which is what Eternal Blue exploits. Eternal Blue, if you're not familiar with it, was developed by NSA. It exploits SMB. I talk quite a bit about it in my book, Getting Started, Become a Master Hacker. It was stolen from the NSA by the Shadow Brokers, which is probably a Russian hacking group, and then was put out on the internet in 2017, in spring of 2017. It became the basis of the ransomware NotPetya and WannaCry. Both of them used it. A lot of other malware used it as well. And when we say used it, we mean it was a way to enter the system and then encrypt everything. You got to get inside the system first. And most ransomware relies upon social engineering. These two, NotPetya and WannaCry, didn't require social engineering. You could simply shoot it out at any IP address and pretty much get inside and then encrypt everything and then ask for a ransom. So this is the first step. So we want to go ahead and see what ports are open. So if we had a piece of malware that exploited port 445, it didn't exploit the port, it exploited the service running on port 445, and that would be SMB. If we had that, then we would know that we couldn't exploit the system because there's no SMB running on it. Right? We could use our exploit all we wanted against this system, but since SMB is not running, it's not going to work. Right? So we have to find another approach based upon what is running on that system. And on this system, there's very little running on it, just HTTP. So we would be looking, if we wanted to take over the system, we'd have to be looking for exploits that exploited, in this case, Apache 2. Okay. Also, one of the things that is nice about Nmap is that we actually have another switch that's useful, okay, -A, which will tell us not only, notice that we ran it here, we saw it's open, and it just tells us it's HTTP. That means it's able to communicate with HTTP, but it doesn't tell us what service is running on port 80. It doesn't tell us whether it's Nginx. It doesn't tell us if it's Apache 2. It doesn't tell us if it's IIS. All of these are HTTP services, all different. And malware generally is specific to the service, all right? So in this case, we want to know, okay, is this IIS? Or is it Apache, or is it Nginx, or is it Lightspeed? Is it some other HTTP server? Then we could use the -A and run it again. And -A attempts to determine what the service is actually running. It takes a little longer, you can see here. All right, and it came back. Okay, let's see how much more information it gave us. So it tells us that it's port 80 is open. Right there, you can see the state is open. All right, and it's HTTP as a service. But look at this. It tells us exactly what the service is behind it and the operating system. What it does is it sends out probes to try to determine the signature of that particular service. So it tells us exactly, it's Apache, and it's 2.446. Exploits, malware are very specific to the service and the version of the service. It tells us more down. It tells us what the operating system is. Okay, notice it says aggressive OS guesses. Linux 3.2 through 4.9. It tells us with a 96% probability that that's correct. And then it gives us some other guesses as well. Okay. It actually tells us there's a network camera on there. Okay. Among other things. So there's no exact OS matches. Okay. But, it's given us a 96% probability that it's correct. Now, it could be wrong, but this is what it does. This is what Nmap does for us as a hacker attacker. Go back to our presentation. Okay, another tool that I have a tutorial on Hackers Arise is called POF, or Passive Operating System Fingerprinting. And what this does, this is developed by Michael Zalewski, who has probably, I think, 4 books from No Starch Press, the same publisher that Linux Basics for Hackers is from, who probably is the best publisher for hacking books. Michael Zalewski developed this tool that basically can tell you what the operating system is, okay, of a target system based upon any packet going over the wire. So what he's done is that he looks at the type of service, the flags, this is all in the IP header, the time to live, and then the window size. He takes those 4 fields off the TCP IP header and can tell you what the operating system is. Once again, this is critical information for the hacker attacker. Okay? You cannot generally attack successfully a system without knowing the operating system. That's the first thing you need to know, is the operating system. Next thing you need to know is what ports are open. Next, you want to know what services are running. Probably you also want to know what language it's in and what applications are running on it. That's part of the strategy of taking over a system. All right. Very seldom, no, never is there a exploit that works against all systems. That silver bullet doesn't exist. Okay. So if you think that did, let me correct you. Okay. There is no silver bullet that allows you to take over all systems. Right. Now, there may be an exploit that'll take advantage of Windows, okay, certain versions of Windows that might take advantage of, obviously, old Windows. Those are the most vulnerable systems, are the older systems. We've had years to find vulnerabilities in them. Newer systems are more secure, right? And we haven't had all that time to find vulnerabilities in them. They might have vulnerabilities, but we haven't found them yet, right? It's just a matter of time that we'll find the vulnerabilities. Operating systems tend to get more secure with time, as well as applications do with time. Each one is a little more secure and a little more difficult to hack. There is no application, no service that's unhackable. That doesn't exist, okay? It's a matter of time before we find a way to hack it, okay? So the first step is to understand what operating system. This is a tool, POF. It's built into Kali, all right? Let's take a look at it. All right, so let's go sudo p. Oh, it's a 0f. Okay. All right, and there it is. There's Michael Zalewski's name right there. Okay. And what it's doing is it's listening on the default interface right now, which is ETH0. My ETH0 doesn't have an IP address, so it's not going to work. I'll have to change it. I'll show you how. But notice it says it loaded 332 signatures. So it has 332 signatures to determine what the operating system is. let's Control C out of it. And let's try it running it again. Go sudo POF, and then I'm going to tell it to go -I interface ETH1. So I want it to listen on ETH1. Okay, now it's listening on ETH1. And then if I go to my other Kali and send traffic to this system, all right, it should be able to tell me what the operating system is. Let's go ahead and open another terminal, and let's start Apache on this system. Go sudo system control, start Apache 2. This is a web server. So now we have a web server running on this one. Got it on both systems. Got to spell start correctly. Apache Apache 2 is built in by default to our Kali. The web server is. And remember we were talking about the default loopback IP address is 127.0.0.1. So if we were to go to our browser and then go 127.0.0.1, right? Not port 50, but your browser by default will go to port 80 and 443. If you don't give it any port number, it'll go there to port 80 and 443. If you want to send it to a different port, like this right here, 5001, which happens to be used by Spiderfoot, which is an OSINT tool, okay, then you just use the colon and then the port number. Well, if you don't use a port number, it goes to port 80 or 443. And look at what it says on our web server. Okay. So this is our web server on our system. This is our Apache server. So it's working, and we can access it by using that IP address, 127.0.0.1. If we wanted to access the web server on our other system, right, we can go 192.168, I'm sorry, 100-5. This is the other Kali system that has a web server running on it. And notice it pulls up the web server, but it gives us the default page. So we haven't put any content up on this web server yet. All right. So until you put content up, this is what you're going to get. This is the default web page for Apache 2. Okay. Now let's go back to this system, and let's see if we can connect to that web server. This is 2021, right? And we're going to try to let's open up a browser. And where's our browser at? There it is. And let's connect back to the other Kali. It has a web server running on it. And I believe our IP address is 192.168.101. Notice that this one is trying to go to port 81. We want to go to 101, and there it is. So we've connected from one machine to the other to the web server. Now let's go back to this system here and look at our POF, okay? Here's the system we went to. It has gone ahead and it sees the traffic coming from the other system, okay? And it's analyzing the packets, all right? And to determine what the operating system is. So you can see the traffic coming in here, and it says that we want the traffic coming from 105. Where's 105 at? Or 5. Yeah, this is all when we're doing a loopback, right? So this is all 101. Now here's the other machine connecting to our web server. Notice it comes back and says client, okay? It's coming from port 42478. It tells us the operating system. Okay, Linux 2.2 to 3X. Okay, gives us a raw signature for it. It'll also tell us the link is either Ethernet or a modem. And it should tell us right here what the browser is. Language is English. All right. And this is really important right here. This is the user agent. Okay. This is the user. User agent is what the browser presents to the system to tell the system what browser they are, who they are, so that the web server can tailor the information to the browser. Okay, so every browser uses the information on a web server differently, right? And certainly it's going to use it differently between, say, a mobile device and a desktop machine. So this information basically tells the server, who is this? Okay, and tells us key information about him. This can also often be used to identify you. Okay, so know that that's out there. It can be used to identify you. All right. So that's Michael Zalewski's POF. It's using the information that is being sent over the wire, okay, to determine certain key features of the target system. Collisions, okay. In networking talk, a collision is where two or more interfaces on a single cable try to send information at the same time. It can clog up a busy network. Modern switches resolve most of these issues, okay. Broadcast, okay. Broadcast packets are destined for every interface on the network, okay. The destination MAC address is simply FFFFFFF. This is all hexadecimal, right? So F represents the largest number in hexadecimal. Hexadecimal runs from 0 to F, okay? So this would be in decimal, it would be 255, 255, 255, 255, 255, okay? DHCP uses broadcast, okay? DHCP we haven't talked about yet, but this is Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. DHCP is the service that assigns the IP addresses, so that when I boot up my system, all right, my Kali, for instance, I boot it up, before it gets an IP address from DHCP, it doesn't have an IP address. It has to be assigned an IP address by the DHCP server. All right, that's the Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. Wireless networks use radio signals to communicate. Every wireless adapter has a MAC address, just like the wired adapter. Uses a wireless access point, or WAP, or just an AP. Okay, that is the system that you connect to. That's called the AP, or the wireless AP. Collisions are very likely in this environment. Let's talk about our protocols then. We've talked about TCP/IP, but let's talk about what those are. What are protocols? What are network protocols? Okay. Protocols are simply a standard way to communicate. It's an agreed upon mode of communication. So, for instance, we've agreed that in this class that we're going to use English. Okay. Now, we all may not be English speakers, or it may not be our native language, but we have to choose a way that we all can understand each other. That's what a protocol is. It's like, okay, this is how we can all talk to each other. And we saw that in the TCP/IP header, there was certain fields within the packet are defined so that if you use those, then everybody else can understand you. If you use them properly, then everybody can understand you. All of this is generally done within the operating system. Okay, so when you go to send out a TCP packet, the operating system assigns, okay, all the fields properly so that the other end of the connection can understand you. But as a hacker, all right, you don't have to do that. Okay, you can send out packets that don't comply with the what are called the RFCs. The RFCs define the protocols. You don't have to send out packets that are compliant with the RFCs. Sometimes this can be good. Sometimes by sending out packets that don't comply with the RFCs, you can learn something about the other system. Okay, and of course, the first step of any good hacking is reconnaissance. If you don't do good reconnaissance, you aren't going to be successful as a hacker, because malware exploits, whatever you want to call them, are very specific. And if you don't know who the target is and what they're using, you're not going to be successful. Therefore, reconnaissance is key. Okay? So the same applies to network devices. There are many manufacturers and languages, but a protocol is determined by an RFC. RFC stands for request for comment. Okay? And unlike what it sounds like, it actually is not a comment. It's a definition. It's a definition of a protocol. All right. How do we communicate? Okay, so we've done a bit with IP addresses. All right. So let's kind of break this down, okay, to kind of understand how IP addresses work. Okay. Every device on a TCP IP network must have a unique IP address. Okay. You should have a basic understanding of binary or base 2. Okay, so let's do a quick run through of base 2. All right, so here we have, all right, we've got 8 bits. All right, so notice we start counting at 0. Okay, so it's 2 to the 0. Okay, if that switches on, it represents 1. 2 to the 1. Okay, 2 to the first power is going to represent 2. 2 to the second power, twice as much, 4. 2 to the third power, 8. 2 to the fourth power, 16. 2 to the fifth power, 32. 2 to the sixth power, 64. And 2 to the seventh power is 128. You might recognize this as being 1 byte. Okay, 1 byte is equal to 8 bits. Each one of these switches, okay, each one of the switches represents a bit. Okay, 8 of them together is a byte. So that if all of these are turned on, if they're all turned on, you simply add up all of these values, okay, and you're going to get 255, right? Notice that's the largest number that you can have in an IP address. Right? 255, 255, 255, 255. That's the largest number that can be represented in a single octet of a IP address. Right? And the way we determine that is if all these switches are on, okay, we add those all together and we get 255. Here's our base 2 or binary, showing us the same thing here. All right, so if this switch is turned on, it's 1. This switch is turned on, 2, 4. And we're working with just 8 columns here. That's a byte, all right? Showing us the same representation we saw in a vertical in the previous. You should be familiar with this. You don't necessarily have to be able to do math, add and subtract, multiply in base 2, but you should know what each one of these columns represents, all right? And these numbers should be familiar to you. Okay, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, 1024. Okay, these are all base 2 numbers. IP addresses. IP addresses are 4 octets. An octet is 8, right? 4 octets of binary data represented in decimal. So they are, each one of them is an octet. An octet in this case is a byte of binary data that basically is converted into decimal. So that, for instance, our IP address of 192.168.1.101, okay, each one of these between the dot, okay, this is 8 bits here, this is 8 bits here, this is 8 bits here, and 8 bits here, right? That's how we represent IP addresses. So there's 32 total bits, and 32, okay, 2 to the 32 power is 4.3 billion. That's why we only have 4.3 billion IP addresses. All right, so here we go. Let's take a look at a particular IP address. We have an IP address of 172.16.254.1. In binary, this is the way it looks like, okay? Let's start over here. So the 1 is pretty simple, right? It's going to be all zeros and a 1, okay? That's how we get the 1. We've converted this binary into decimal. Over in the second place, we have all of the switches turned on, 1s, except for this one. And if we add these all together, 128, 64, 32, 16, 8, 4, 2, we get 254. Over here, we've got a 16, and the only one that's turned on is the 16. That would be 2 to the 4th power, okay? And then we have the 172, which means the first bit is turned on, the third bit's turned on, in this case the 5th bit and the 6th bit, and we end up with, by summing those all together, we convert it into decimal, and we get 172. This is what our IP addresses are, okay? Are simply converting base 2 into decimal. In between each dot, there is 8 bits. All right, that's how we manage IP addresses. Most of us use IPv4. That's a system of 32 bits. Okay, it's limited to 4.3 billion IP addresses. That's a problem. All right. IPv6 is coming. It uses 128 bits. It allows for many more addresses, like trillions of addresses. We shouldn't run out of those anytime soon. Among these IP address classes, okay, so you should be familiar with these. All right, so class A, okay, it starts at 0 and ends at 127, 255, 255, 255. This is the end of the 127s, okay? So it goes right from 0 to the end of 127. Notice that's the highest number that can be represented by a byte of data, okay? Class B starts at 128, where this one left off, right? And it runs to 192, 255, 255, 255. That's the largest of the 192s. And then class C starts at 192 and runs all the way to 223, and the largest number can be represented there. We also have a few others. I wouldn't waste your time memorizing these, but you do need to know these. Class A IP addresses, all right, designed for very large networks. The first 8 bits represent a network, the 255, and 24 bits representing hosts. All right, so let's see if we can understand this. In a class A, this first byte ranges from 0 to 255. That means that there can be 255 networks. And the 24 bits, okay, that's remainder here, represents how many hosts can be on any particular network. In this case, 16 million, okay? It's actually 16.3 million, I believe. Class B Then the first 16 bits represent the network, and the final 16 bits represent how many hosts can be on each network. Class C uses 24 bits to break up all of the networks. Okay, so that's going to be what 16.7 different networks, and only 255 hosts on each network. All right. Here's a Class B, medium-sized networks. The first 16 bits are network, 65,536, and 65,536 for hosts. Class C are for small networks. This might be what's being used in your local network, your work network, your home network. Okay. Notice that my IP address, okay, on my network was 192.168.100.1, I believe. Okay. So that would mean that, let's go back here. Okay. It's going to be in a Class C right here, starting at 192. It's going to be a Class C, small networks. Only 255 hosts can be on that network. Here's our Class C. Private IPs. I recommend that you memorize these. These, if you don't know them, you should memorize them. Okay. This is the private. So we have all the other IP addresses. All the other IP addresses that are not in the ranges displayed here are public IPs. That means that they're routable. You can use them to communicate over the internet. Okay. These are private. They are only for communication on your local area network. So notice that my IP address was 192.168. This is part of the range of private IP addresses. These only work internally on your network. If you tried to send out a packet with that IP address, it would not go anyplace. Okay, it would not work. These only work inside your network. And the reason that we have this is to conserve IP addresses. Remember, there's only 4.3 billion IP addresses. We need more than that. So what we do is that we use these private IP addresses internally on our network, and then we hold the public IP addresses for communicating on the outside. And what we'll see in a minute is that we have what's called network address translation, or NAT, that takes these internal IP addresses and then converts them into a public IP address to be able to communicate over the internet. So these are only used internally. A NAT device then converts it into a public IP address and sends it out to Hackers Arise, for instance. Okay, so that when I'm trying to reach Hackers Arise from my machine is using 192.168.100.1. It says, I want to go out to Hackers Arise. To reach Hackers Arise, I have to send it out to the router, which oftentimes the router and the NAT device are integrated together. And it converts my IP address into a public IP address. It goes out to Hackers Arise over the internet. Hackers Arise responds back to my router. It converts that IP address into a private IP address and sends me the results. All right. This is what we've had to put together to maintain IPv4. Once we get to IPv6, where everybody has their own unique IP address, NAT devices will become unnecessary. You know, we've been working on trying to make that transition for over 20 years now. It still hasn't happened. So maybe it'll happen soon. But in any case, this whole concept, this whole workaround, that's what it is. It's really just a workaround to conserve IP addresses. This system will be obsolete once we all convert to IPv6. Subnets, okay? On a Class A network, okay, we have Network is spelled wrong here. And a Class A network, the subnet is 255. On a Class B, it's the subnet mask is 255, 255. And on Class C, it's 255, 255, 250. Now, this begs the question: what is a subnet mask? And that's what we're going to get to. Okay. Okay. Why subnetting? All right. Let's start. Why do we subnet? Okay. And then we'll talk about what these subnet masks do and how they work. Subnetting lets network administrators use the 32 bits, that's the total number of bits in IPv4, okay, more efficiently. They can create subnets within a Class A, Class B, Class C network. This enables the administrator to create networks with more realistic host numbers. Subnetting provides a flexible way to designate which portion of the IP address represents hosts and which portion represents the network. In addition, even if a single organization has thousands of devices, okay, so think about a very large organization like the military or a very big company, with thousands of people, tens of thousands of people, we don't necessarily want them running on the same network. We can break that network up into pieces, okay? The network would slow dramatically if everybody was on the same network. By dividing up the network, you can have different physical networks and broadcast domains. A subnet is a network within a network, namely a Class A, B, or C. Subnets are created by using one or more of the host bits to extend the network ID. As you know, Class A networks have 8 bits of network ID. Class B have a standard 16-bit network ID, and Class C has a standard 24-bit network ID. Subnet netting enables us to create network IDs of any size. Okay. Network mask. Okay. A network mask, okay, or often referred to as just net mask, is a binary mask that is applied to an IP address to determine whether two IP addresses are on the same subnet. A network mask works by applying binary AND operations between the IP address and the mask. The way to think about a network mask is that basically the reason it's called a mask is, think about it, is it blocks out. It blocks out certain portions of the IP address. It's a mask. Okay, just like a mask would cover up your eyes, a network mask covers up certain bits in the IP address. Now, if we go back to our Kali system, all right, let's go over here. And we still got a couple things running over here. Here's how ping still running. Stop it. Okay. Use a control C to exit, and then I clear my screen with a clear. And I go sudo ifconfig. I can see the net mask right here. Okay. This says that everything here, okay, everything here is part of the network ID. 0 means that this portion can be used for hosts. This can, all of this over here has to be used for the network ID. So think of it as, remember that 255 means that every one of the bits is on. It's a 1. It is blocking, okay, that portion of the IP address. So think of it, the 255 goes down below this part. It blocks this and says this is not available for hosts. This 255 blocks all of this and says this is not available for hosts. And this 255 here blocks this octet and says this is not available for network ID. This is a 0. That means that none of the switches are turned on. So it says all of this is available for hosts. Okay. So these are masks. They are blocking a portion of the IP address for use in hosts. We'll show you some more about this in just a moment. Okay. All right. Here's subnet mask. Here's what I was trying to convey here. Okay. Subnet masks use the 32-bit structure of the IP address. The subnet masks tell us that which bits are for the network ID and which bits are for the host ID. When the subnet mask bit is set to 1, this means it's part of the network. A bit marked as 0 is part of the host ID. The diagram below is meant to demonstrate this process in a bitwise AND operation between the IP address and its mask. Okay, so here's the mask. All right, here's the mask. These are all ones. This is 255. All ones, 255. All ones, 255. All right. So here's our IP address. Okay, it's 192.168.1.5. So 128 plus 64. Okay, that's 192. Over here we have 128. 128, 32, and 8. Okay, so what we do is we AND them, and you can see that what happens, what drops out of it is 192.168.1.0. So all of this portion here is available for hosts. Okay, think of this as the ones blocking. They block the use of this area here. And the zeros don't block. Okay, so that this portion drops down, okay, for hosts, and these portions do not. All right. CIDR notation, you've probably heard this term before. It's called the classless interdomain routing notation as a way of representing an IP address and the network mask associated with it. CIDR notation specifies an IP address and a slash and a decimal number such as 192.168.10.24, where 24 represents a number of bits in the network mask. So we're basically saying that the network mask is 255.255.255.0. That's what we're using 24-bit mask. Of course, the number of bits can vary depending upon the number of subnets, right? So for instance, let's go back to our Kali, okay? And remember we were talking about Nmap, right? So say that we wanted to use Nmap to go ahead and scan an entire network. We can do that, all right? And let's say that we wanted to scan the entire network that my system is on. So we could go sudo, okay, nmap, okay, -st. This is a TCP scan, it's three-way handshake scan, right? And then I could give it the CIDR notation of my entire network, all right, 192.168.100.0/24, all right? What this is telling Nmap to do is to scan all 255 IP addresses. I could make a list of all 255 of them, right? And say, go scan all of those. But in this case, I am only looking for, all of the particular machines that are on this network. And I can simplify my task by saying, just scan using CIDR notation. And most applications, most networking applications, will accept CIDR notation, right? And so I can go ahead and, all right, let's go do scan. And let's go ahead and it understands the CIDR notation. It's going ahead and doing its work. It's trying to scan 255 IP addresses, and it did. All right, and it scanned. Let's see what we found. All right, it found a DNS port 53. Open here. Okay. On this system over here, look at what it found. Okay, it found port 13, port 135, and port 445. All right. On 3, it found it said all of them are filtered. Now, when it says filtered, that means that there's probably filtered usually indicates that there's a some type of I'm sorry, firewall in place. Okay, that's what usually filtered means. Sometimes Nmap will come back and say open, or to say open slash filtered, meaning it's not quite sure. In this case, it tells me that there's a firewall blocking all the traffic there. Here we found port 80 open, and this one it found port 80 open as well. But you can see the important point here is that I can use CIDR notation as shorthand to say scan every machine on this network. Okay. Now, if I wanted to scan even more systems, like I wanted to scan 65,535 systems, so I got a really big network, for instance, right? I could use something like this and then use 16, or this is not really appropriate in a class C, but say I had a class A network or a class B network, okay? It might look like something like this. And then go ahead and scan 65,000 systems on that network, all right? So Nmap and most every other networking application will recognize CIDR notation. This is a shorthand to represent the net mask, okay? I talked a little bit earlier about network address translation, all right? So remember we talked about the fact that in IPv4 that we use these internal IP addresses and then they get converted to a external or public IP address. That process is called network address translation. All right. So here we see that we have a PC here and it's using 192.168.04, very similar to mine, right? And it goes out to the gateway, okay, at 192.168.01. Notice it's showing us here that the internal addresses, all right, this is the CIDR notation of the internal addresses. And then it goes to a NAT table, and the NAT table takes this IP address right here and converts it into a public IP and sends it out to an external machine on another network. All right. That's what network address translation does. Since internal networks use private IP addresses and the internet uses public IP addresses, a device must translate the private IP to a public IP. DHCP, or Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol, automatically assigns IP addresses to every host on the network. That's how we assign all the IP addresses to machines on our network, and then we make sure that they're all in a certain range, okay, of IP addresses. So we don't get IP addresses that are outside of our particular network. This machine, this server, okay, ends up with a range of IP addresses and it assigns them to all the systems on our network. So here's our IP address database here. Here's our DHCP server. It goes into this database and says, okay, what IP addresses are available, okay, for our network? It grabs an available IP address and then it assigns it, okay, to each one of the systems on the network. When they shut down, that IP address then becomes available and it can be used on another system. So let's go back to our Kali system. And let's go and open up Wireshark again. Let's go clear my screen first. All right, and then go sudo Wireshark. Okay, and let's go to ETH1. And let's start some, let's get some traffic running. Let's go out and do our ping of Google again. Oh, heck, we got another system on here. We can go 192. Let's ping our other Kali system. 168. 105. All right, there's our ping going out. All right. We can see the traffic beginning to run. You can see there's some ARPs going on here. Let's see if we can't find some DHCP. We may not find any because our system has already been booted. Oh, there we go. All right, here we go. This is DHCP. This is where we're going ahead and essentially the DHCP server is sending out a request, okay? And then there's an acknowledgement by my system, all right? What this is doing is it's requesting an IP address, and then it gets a response back. It says, okay, this is your IP address. Notice also that it uses user datagram protocol. It uses UDP. UDP is a much more lightweight protocol. It doesn't necessarily guarantee that the packet arrives, which is one of its drawbacks, but it's also one of its strengths because it's lightweight. It's lightweight. It doesn't require as much overhead to run. So this DHCP uses UDP. Let's talk a little bit about UDP. UDP is another one of those protocols that's part of the TCP/IP suite, okay? And the key difference between it is it's very lightweight. And one of those things is that it doesn't guarantee that the packet actually arrives. It doesn't guarantee the packet arrives. Why would I want that? Well, I'd want that in cases where I can simply send out packets and send out packets and send out packets and not really worry about whether or not they arrive, like streaming music or streaming video or DHCP, okay? It'll just keep on sending the packets out. If one packet gets lost in your YouTube video, you're not really going to notice it. If one packet gets lost in your music that you're listening to, say Spotify, you may not even notice it. Okay. So what we want efficiency, lightweightness. Okay. Lightweightness. I guess that's a word, maybe. And that's what UDP gives us. It gives us efficiency without all the overhead and in protocols in areas where we don't really care if the packet actually arrives. So that's DHCP. Other protocols that use DHCP, SNMP, Network Time Protocol, NTP, all use UDP as well. Hang on one second. I want to show you something here. Let's see if I've got a good diagram of, yeah, here we go. Let me expand this for you. Here's some of the most important ports. And if you're not familiar with these, you should be, okay? And notice there's not that many here. These are the most important ones. So this port 21 is FTP. Notice it can use either on TCP or UDP. Port 22, SSH, TCP or UDP. Telnet is 23. SMTP. Now SMTP is our email servers. Okay. DNS is our domain name servers, 53. DHCP uses port 67 and 68. Notice it's only UDP. 80 is HTTP, TCP, and UDP. 110 is POP3. This is between your system. This is the client to collect emails, POP3, TCP, and UDP. 137, 139 is NetBIOS, TCP, and UDP. 143 is IMAP, which is another protocol for being able to communicate between the client and the SMTP server. It's TCP. You would imagine that these protocols that are associated with email should be TCP, right? SNMP, this is where the network devices communicate with each other. We'll address this probably tomorrow. Uses TCP and UDP, depends upon what it's doing. Okay, in some cases it'll use TCP, in other cases it'll use UDP. 389 is LDAP. This is lightweight database service, okay, such as AD, okay. Authentication is TCP or UDP. 427 is SLIP. 443 is HTTPS. 445 is SMB. 548 is AFP, and 3389 is RDP. Okay, those are kind of the key. I would say you have to know those cold. All right. All right. You can see we've got some more DHCP taking place here. While we're working on other stuff, we saw another DHCP request go out. Here's our DHCP server. And we saw this taking place on our Wireshark. So the host A, okay, comes online and it goes ahead and says, I need a DHCP assigned IP address. Okay. So it goes out and sends out a packet, a DHCP discover packet to the DHCP server. It goes ahead and makes an offer. And then the DHCP request goes to the server again, and then the DHCP ACK takes place. Okay. So this is the way it confirms that one is assigns the IP address and then confirms the IP address to the client. DHCP servers have a scope, okay? That's simply the range of IP addresses. These are the IP addresses that are going to be used on this network, okay? And they have a time limit. This is called a lease duration, right? Now, there might be certain IP addresses like the ones that you say your web server or file server is using that are going to be reserved. And all the other machines on the network, it all depends upon, who goes into the server first. The IP addresses can change, but you might have certain ones that you say, okay, these are always going to be assigned to my web server, my file server. They're not going to move. That's what's called IP address reservation. All the rest of them can be changed. So they have this scope. So one of the things that an attacker can do is to go out and take up and use up all the IP addresses, right? So this would be an internal attack within the network, right? So I'm inside my network and I can go out and just keep on requesting IP addresses from the DHCP server until there's no addresses left. And then the other clients, they don't get anything, right? So essentially it's a DOS attack, a denial of service attack. I take up all the IP addresses and then there's none left over. So for instance, if this network was a Class C network, I could go ahead and request all 255, which is not that many. Put all of those on my machine or systems, and then there's nothing left over for the legitimate systems on the network. This is one of the things as a hacker attacker that you should be familiar with is the CVEs, and those are the vulnerabilities that have been cataloged their known vulnerabilities, and these are some of them that are from recent years. This is actually a few years ago. Notice that the CVEs are cataloged by CVE and then the year and then a sequential number, and then they're categorized by how severe they are. Actually, this is from 2019. Okay, so it's updated in 2019. And so those that get close to 10 are really severe. All right. So you can see, for instance, here we can read it says the ISE DHCP 4.1x through this does not restrict the number of concurrent TCP sessions, which allows remote attackers to cause a denial of service, okay, by establishing many sessions. Right. So this is essentially what we're talking about. This is an exhaustion attack, okay, against the DHCP server, right? And they give it a score of 7.1, okay? We have another one here. It's a 7.1, allows remote attackers to cause a DOS in opportunistic circumstances by establishing an IPv6 lease in an environment where the lease expiration time is later reduced, right? These are some of the attacks that can be used against DHCP. When we're working in Kali, sometimes we want to go ahead and request a new IP address. And the way we do that, Carlos, you lost your electricity? Good. I'm glad you're back. Okay. Sometimes in Kali or any of the Linuxes, we want to go ahead and request a new IP address. And the way we do that is sudo dh client and then the interface. So let's take a look at that. Let's go back. And I'm going to use this terminal here. All right, let me clear my screen. And then go sudo, okay, ifconfig. Now, you can see that this one has a DHCP assigned IP address, right? This Ethernet 2, okay? Ethernet 1, okay, doesn't have an IP address assigned to it. So let's see if we can get it an IP address so that it can actually be used. So we can go sudo, okay, DH client, okay, ETH0, all right. I hit enter, and now let's go sudo ifconfig, and let's see if we got a assigned IP address. Looks like we did, right there, okay. So now I can use that IP, I can use that interface for connecting, to anything. Previously, it had not, for whatever reason, the DHCP server didn't assign it an IP address, but now it did, and now we've got an IP address that can work on that network. In some unusual cases, especially in virtual machines, sometimes you might want to assign a static IP address, right? So to do that in Linux, okay, we go sudo, okay, ifconfig, and let's go ETH1, and let's say we want to give it 192.168, 100, and say 242. All right, that's how we assigned an IP address. Now this is a static IP address. All right, so now if I go sudo ifconfig, right, you can see the IP address has changed. All right, and then if I go and try to ping, all right, let's try pinging the other system on our network. Okay, so ping 192.168. 100, that was a 5. That was a Kali system, right? Yeah, that's not a good example because I put assigned the static IP address on which was in the range of the DHCP server. Let's do let's take it assign an IP address. Let's assign IP addresses that are outside the range. Go see ETH on both of the interfaces. Let's go 10, 10, 10, 0, 0, 2. Okay, and then we'll go ETH1, and we'll make this one 3. Notice that these are on a different network. Okay, so now when I try to ping, okay, the other Kali system, right, network is unreachable. All right, so they are on different networks. We have assigned them IP addresses that they can't talk to each other. Now, if I want to get back onto I want to go and get a DHCP assigned IP address, an IP address assigned by the server, which is on the same network. All right, I can just do our DH client. DH client. By the way, this DH client, unfortunately, it doesn't work on all versions of Linux. Different Linuxes use different utilities for this purpose. Okay, so now I've gone ahead. This works on Debian and Ubuntu, I believe, but doesn't work on some of the others. So now if I go and ping, I should be able to connect to the other machine on my network. Yep, because now I have an IP address, okay, that's on the same network that the other Kali system is at. All right. Let's go ahead and let's take another 15-minute break at this point. Let's come back at 15 minutes. Come back at like 7 minutes after the hour, and we'll do some more of network basics for hackers. Okay, we're back. And when we left off, we were talking about DHCP servers and DHCP service. And you can see that all of those DH client requests that I sent, all right, you can see them here. A bunch of them going out. This is Wireshark, just filtering for DHCP. And we can see all of those requests going out across the wire. Now, I promised you we wouldn't go past 4 hours in each day's class, so let's take care of a few other items here, and then we'll call it good for today and resume tomorrow. So let's go back to our presentation. This is what we had just done. Sometimes you'll get this answer here, RT netlink answers file exists. If you get that answer, that means that it successfully was able to assign a new IP address. All right. And here's showing you DHCP, what we just looked at live in Wireshark. And we can go ahead and dissect the packet even further. And we'll do more dissection tomorrow with Wireshark. Let's talk a little bit about DNS. We'll start on DNS here. Actually, this DNS is a very large subject. So why don't we stop for today here, and rather than start into a new subject that's going to take up a lot of time, let's call it good for today, and we're going to come back and address DNS tomorrow's class. So thank you all for coming. I'm hoping you're finding this useful information. If you have problems with any segment of this class, then most of the material is on Hackers Arise. You can go to the Network Basics for Hackers section. Not all of it is, but most of it is. And if you want to go ahead and review it there. Also, of course, the videos will be available at the end of the class that you can go back through. So thank you all for coming. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place. Hopefully we won't have as much issues with people getting in. Everybody will be familiar with class. And we'll spend another 3 or 4 hours on network basics for hackers. Thanks for coming. See y'all soon. Bye.